So let's get straight into it. I think Tayo, you more than anyone, I suspect, have a good idea of how companies are dealing or not dealing with diversity and inclusion. Over the last months, of course, the whole world has started working remotely, which in my optics at least gives organizations the opportunity to actually build a more diverse team now that they're not just hiring from, or have the ability to not just hire from the neighborhood. Have you seen any change, good or bad, over this last month? Love to hear what you think.
It's an interesting question because I'm approaching it through multiple lenses. The last month or two, the climate of the world has meant that a lot of things, a lot of pressure has been put on companies. So it's hard to always gauge if it's authentic or not. So I've seen a lot of push towards, consultants and trainings and things like that. But in my experience, the companies that have reached out to me, they've been more interested in figuring out sustainable plans, and I think that's good. I think my concern and the true test would be what happens a year from now. When maybe COVID is well past us, hopefully, fingers crossed, and people are starting to get back to the office. Does that still stay? The attitude. But for now, I think a lot of the temperament has been on trying to react, and I'm still watching companies to see who's proactive enough to actually do this without being prompted. So yeah, so far so good, but it's hard to measure.
Have you seen any examples of organizations, or maybe organizations that were already remote or independent of that, that actually have done a good job with embracing diversity, or is it mostly talk and no action?
I've worked mostly with companies that just became remote. So for me, even though I've been remote for a long time, a lot of times the companies that I work with, they decided to be remote during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's not like it was something that they were doing before. But even with the remote cultures, the CEOs who decided to make it permanently remote, what I've noticed, I'm thinking of one company in particular, they've widened their net for hiring, which is what I was advocating for before, and it's good to see that happen. There's a company that I know that I work with, which is based in Maryland, and now they hire on the West Coast. They hire on different time zones, and they know that they don't have to be in the office. So the office that they had, I think they're now leasing it out. So there's that. And then thinking of another company, which is a call center that I have, they have also opened up their idea of changing geography. So those would be the two biggest ones that I can say. But yeah.
And then when thinking about hiring, you say widening the net is something you advocated for before. Is that sufficient? Like, if I just say, well, I'm going to hire from anywhere, am I automatically going to build a remote team? And yes, I'm setting you up with this answer.
Well, it's a start. It's a start because then you're not going to have the excuse of demographics. So there's some cities where the demographics might not match what you're trying to match in terms of your customers and clientele. But then you can also think about demographics from the idea of different age, different generation, nationality, things like that, and all those perspectives really add a certain idea to your culture. They add culture, in essence, to your company. So that's the lens that I think of, yeah. So that way, there's a different dimension of diversity and inclusion there.
And so the moment that you have this way, so you have more applicants of a greater diversity in your pool. What is next as an organization? What is the obvious next step that companies are not doing today?
It's just the inclusion aspect of this, because to me, communication is a big part of inclusion, and many companies fail with the communication aspect. Whether it's communicating updates, communicating what the development plan is, the people development plan is, making sure that if you're a startup, talking about the state of the company. And when there was no pandemic, that was already a problem, but now with the pandemic, it's hard sometimes to mimic that environment for some CEOs. So, because to them they're like, okay, I've got to report to my board, and then I've got to raise money, and it's now in a virtual environment. The last thing I'm thinking of is, updating my employees on, hey, we just acquired this company, we just did this is going to impact your policies. But the reason why I say that that's the thing that I've noticed that has fallen um, to wayside is that it becomes very easy to get to justify not having time with a lot of what's going on with teaching and being a parent and all that. And that's why I always say, whenever you're in a remote environment, structure is the most important thing that you can do as a leader. Providing people with a plan and being proactive enough to say, hey, this is where we are right now. Each week, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to meet on these specific issues. Your salary is going to be this. As far as your career path, we're going to make sure you get here. You let me know what you want, and let me see if I can pair you up with a mentor, and that. But that's the thing that I've seen that has honestly been the thing that has struggled the most in my assessment.
That's very interesting to hear. In my experience, I always feel like the moment you start working remotely and the moment you start building a distributed team, the distance between any individual is as great as any other. Meaning that it's relatively easy to talk to a whole group of people because you literally don't have to get everybody together in a room. You can just send them a message or like an
You would
email or
think.
yeah.
You
Uh,
would think. You would think. I'm hearing a lot of, some people are, what do you call it? They say I'm zoomed out or
yeah.
all that. But I actually think it's a good chance for people to uh, figure out how to engage more and more in terms of learning how to communicate beyond what we're used to. And I think a lot of communication has to do outside of verbal. It's a lot of nonverbal. It's a lot of things that we miss out on. And this is a good chance for people to decide to be proactive and say, hey, let me get to know John. Let me get to know Kofi. Let me get to know, Margaret. But there has to be that onus and that company culture that promotes that, because sometimes people feel like, I don't want to overstep. I don't know if this person knows me. Is this a new hire? Let me just stay here, and they won't know anything until there's that environment and that of cohesiveness there.
And reading your website, you talk a lot about cultural differences between people from all over the world. Have you seen this accelerate or change now that everybody's working remotely, or in particular in companies that are remote?
Yeah, it has a lot. I think it's caused a lot of people to relax on some of the cultural norms that they might have had. The big cultural differences would be timing. Some people have different flexibility with time. Some people can say it's a certain time you come here, but maybe 2 hours later is what they mean. But now that has to be more rigid, because 2 hours is a big time. Maybe your kids are away, and then within that 2 hour window, if you don't show up, you really have to be there. You talk about diapers and changing. That has to be top of mind. Also, respect and communication. And sometimes in meetings, in some cultures, people don't get they don't speak unless they get called upon.
Mm.
And it's hard to figure out how to call upon someone in a different setting in Zoom the way you do. Some people prefer one-on-one. Some people want to reach out to you first of all. And so it's become more imperative for people to set the standard and say, hey, in this setting, I'm going to talk this way. Uh, Feel free to have more input. It's not going to be seen as subordinate. And it's interesting. I do think, though, that with that clarity, companies are getting used to it and adjusting to it. And then there are people that just, honestly, people that haven't figured out how to adjust to the new normal. And I think that's probably more of a hindrance, because the idea of holding on to the concept that we're going to go back to normal, I think is probably not going to be a case that is going to help people, because the normal that we're going to experience is going to be new. So, yeah.
I think one thing that especially when talking about like getting zoomed out, is we always advocate very hard for asynchronous work and trying to do the actual work that you do to be as offline as possible. And what I've been seeing is that there's this strong counter reaction to this, which is, well, I want to talk with people and I want to be with people, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting to try to communicate to the whole world. It's like, no, we're talking about asynchronous work. That doesn't mean that we don't like other people and that we don't have meetings to get to know each other, and we have calls to, build a culture, build connection between people in the organization. I think that has definitely been a challenge in terms of how remote work or working from home has been perceived.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I don't want to say that that's all the companies that I work with, because some companies really thrive on that, but yes, the idea of that is not something people are used to, and I've also seen some companies, not all companies, some companies, because of the lack of trust that comes from some people who are able to build rapport in the office. There's a micromanagement thing, and it sometimes doesn't have the best effect because people are actually walking on eggshells and feeling like, consequence, what did I do, what did I do? And so those are some of the things I try to bring up ahead of time. How do you first, when I'm leading with teams, I always specifically work on bias and team building so that people can understand how to communicate effectively, and then understand how to build those trust and build rapport, so that as the months go by, you don't default to a bad habit of making someone feel like they are incompetent, because that plays a big role in how the morale of the employee is.
And so how does bias play into this?
Well, so bias, if you're thinking of hiring someone from a different background, we all have biases, right? And if your first interaction with someone from a different background is virtual, and you haven't really gotten to experience them tell you their lived experiences, it's easy for people to, to default to their triggers. So we get our biases get triggered mostly when we don't have enough time, or multitasking, or tired. So you think about the world. Imagine all these things. I'm tired. I have so many deadlines. I'm talking to Hong Kong. I'm talking to these things. Even if you have all these good intentions, sometimes if you haven't actually reflected on what your bias is or become aware of what those things are, you could just misinterpret things. And when you misinterpret that, you say something, and it's not even always in person. It might be an email or a chat or a Slack chat. And that person misinterprets that, and then it becomes this whole thing where this person's a jerk, or he never does this, or she never does that, and it becomes really problematic. And that can create this whole cycle where there's a separation where that it needs to be, and it's one of those things that I always try to at least bring up first. First of all,
Is
whenever
it
we're
is it
doing that.
sufficient to be aware of your biases, or do you need to do more than that?
Awareness plus action equals change, is what I always say. Awareness is a good part of it, but action needs to be there as well. And action really comes from that commitment to unlearning and commitment to being open. Not many people are open to the idea of multiple ways to get to the same path.
Mm.
And there's a story I always share, and it's one of my favorite stories. And I was interviewing someone for my podcast, and he was he used to lead an Asian team, and there were a bunch of people from North America on the company, but he was there on a retreat. So he asked people, "Hey, what animal should our new year be?" And a bunch of people said from the Asian market said a snake, and it led to this argument because people were like, "What? Why would you say it was snake? It's so dark. It's like the devil. It's just horrendous." And it was back and forth, and this gentleman noticed, a lady, and I think she was from Korea, and he asked her, "Hey, why haven't you said anything?" He said, "Well, you didn't call on me, and if you called on me, I would have said something." Culture, and so he said, "Well, why don't you share your opinion?" And she said, "Well, um, in my culture, uh, a snake signifies growth, and we shed our your snake shed their skin, and it signifies growth." And everybody in the room just kept quiet, and they all of a sudden realized that they hadn't listened, and it was because both cultures had this idea of what a snake meant, but none of them were actually listening.
Yeah.
And if they were looked around, they would have seen, first of all, we're marketing to an Asian market. This is a different interpretation. I'm bringing my lens here into this. I'm getting offended by this, and I didn't even ask why. And that's what I'm noticing happens a lot. And that comes from, the interpretations that come with biases and all that. So it's very important for those type of things to happen.
That's a great story. That's very nice. And so, you mentioned like there's going to be a new normal. We're not going to go back to the way things were. How do you think? What do you think is going to happen in the next few years, and in particular in the areas that you're interested in?
Well, I think a lot of companies are going to be virtual. I think a lot of schools are going to, a lot of parents are going to go for a homeschool option as well, because I operate in the workplace, education, and media fields. And some people are going to like the new, the new model, and it's going to be the onus is going to be on companies to come up with a flex model where people can accommodate both types of things. And given that, that means that people are going to need to learn how to truly pick up on the rapport and building rapport with people from virtual environments. How do you know someone's habits? Well, how do you know what someone likes and what someone doesn't do? Which means you're going to have to be more vigilant and more proactive with getting to know people. In terms of policies and things like I guess growth, I do think we're going to actually tap into some of the globalization that we've missed out on before, because some companies I'm noticing are realizing that there's cheaper labor, which is, I don't know where I stand on this yet, because I think we can get into this unethical zone. But I've noticed, I've had conversations with CEO where like, oh, I don't have to pay people this amount of money. I pay them here, but in this country, this is what it is. And so they end up paying less than they're worth in their own country.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a little, I don't know, that's unethical, I think. But I'm
You
noticing
think
that.
everybody should be paid the same salary, independent of where they live?
I think if you're doing the same job and you've set a salary, maybe I'm in minority of this, for that job, that person should be compensated the same way, man, woman, non-binary individual. But I know that a lot of companies are adjusting to the currency and different time zones. But I don't know. It's hard for me to reconcile that. I don't know. I'm like an idealist sometimes. So
No, I think that's good. I mean, we get that question every single day, tens of times from our customers that employ people for the first time in other countries, and they say like, how much should I pay this person? And what I tend to recommend, which is not necessarily what my opinion is, but what I tend to recommend is you set a floor for a particular position. So you say, we're going to pay at least everybody 50K, independent of where they live in the planet. And then I'm going to adjust to local market, or local market could be the market that this person is in, not even in physical location, but the labor market in which they are active in, and then sometimes the physical location they're in. What we see is that companies that try to pay everybody the same, they either end up doing one of two things. One, they pay everybody San Francisco salary because that's the highest on the market, and you have no alternative. You want to hire those people as well, and if you don't do that, you're going to have salary discrepancies that you don't want in your organizations, or they're going to avoid hiring those people that live in San Francisco or that like have high
yeah.
position in companies, and they're going to be faced with like, oh, we need this important position, and there's very limited talent, but like we are not willing to pay for it, and so I really like personally feel like, yes, we should all be paid the same way, but if you're very pragmatic about it, it's like it's going to be really hard to make that happen for any organization of scale.
Because of the standard of living. Because you brought up San Francisco. San Francisco, I live in New York. San Francisco is consistently the most expensive city,
Yeah,
or New York back and forth.
yeah,
And there, that's the argument.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, like I said, it's I think it's the idealist in me, but I could see how, if you pay the same in one city, it's not the same for another city that doesn't have to pay as much in rent or school and all that. But Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's tricky, you know. And then there's also the question here is like, well, but do you actually have the choice to live in a particular place, right? Like you don't always choose where you live. Like the very few people have that luxury. Most people, they live in a place where their loved ones are, or where, you know, they were born, and they just don't want to leave. Like I think that's a great reason to be in a particular place.
yeah.
And so you don't want to put the onus on the individual to say like, oh, I'm going to move to a place where my income is better relative to my local expense.
That's right. That's right. And you were asking what things are going to change. I think that is going to be, you know, limited now. I think a lot of people are going to start to realize that they don't have to just move essentially for jobs. There's some companies now that you can do virtually. I think people are realizing that, and for those, you know, I've seen a lot of people leave New York and a lot of people stay in New York, vice versa. And people staying in New York are the ones that, you know, are like truly in love with the city, I've noticed. And so they find a way to stay here, and other people are realizing I don't have to be here,
Yeah.
and they go back, you know, to their family's home, and companies are accommodating for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Tayo, last question. You know, we've been through a horrible period with the pandemic. We're in the middle of it, unfortunately, through lockdowns and everything. You are someone that is, you're incredibly stylish. You wear amazing suits. How have you been
Oh, I
dealing this
didn't wear a
time?
suit today.
I thought about wearing my suit today, but I was thinking, you know, I don't want to put him on the spot. Like, how are you dealing? Are you wearing suits around the house? How are you? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah. I have become I love suits, and you're right. And I've noticed during the pandemic I've started wearing more more t-shirts, and it's I was like, oh gosh, I could actually wear t-shirts. But I do like to wear suits. So what I do now is, since for you know, for my school that I'm a professor, they have a flex model. Most of my students are still virtual,
Mm.
but because maybe two or three of them wanted to be in person, I have to be there.
Yeah.
And I just always wear the suit there. Like, yeah,
Nice. Yeah.
I wear the suit there. But you're right. It is something that I miss. But I think it's a small price to pay for 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 trying to provide a safe world. But yeah, I just haven't found myself being as comfortable wearing the suits on Zoom as I thought I would be. Because yeah. We'll see.
You're quickly overdressed on Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
the
start to
bars are
realize,
enough.
because I was doing it at first, and then I was noticing everybody was just like in their t-shirts, and it would be normal, and everybody would be there, and I'm like, hey, you know, maybe I should just relax.
Tayo, thanks so
Yeah.
much for taking the time today. Where can people find you on the internet?
I'm at Ty Rockson on any social media platform, so Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and then yeah, tyroxon.com for the website.
Right. Thanks so much.
Pleasure's mine.